for the greatest show in fantasy football history, hosted by the incomparable Scott Connor and the one and only Ray GQ. I present to you Destination Chill, where football and fantasy collide.
What's cracking, everybody? Happy holiday season, and welcome back for another episode of Destination Chill. I'm the host of this bad boy, Ray G. You can find me on X at RayGQ. That's QUE. Shout out to all my frat brothers out there, and I am joined, as always, by my man, my friend, the GOAT himself, Scott Connor at Charles Chill FFB. Scott, how are the holidays for you, my friend? How's everything going, man?
Going well. It's been hectic last week or so, but glad to be back on here talking some fantasy. Championship week. A lot of deals going down in leagues with no trade deadlines. Shout out to every league that does not have a trade deadline. Once you do it, you will not go back. But yeah, it's been good. I hope everybody out there had good holidays. We've been a little inconsistent in December doing the show just because there's a lot of stuff going on. But glad to be back. And I'm ready. Honestly, I sent this to you earlier. I'm glad to start moving towards the offseason, looking at roster construction, looking at offseason strategy, starting fresh. Not that the season isn't fun, but there's only so many weeks I can take of, all right, which players have a concussion, which players have a high ankle sprain, which guys do you need to cut by Wednesday when you have no clue if they're going to be ready by Saturday or even Sunday morning. So it's kind of good for the grind to be over, and I guarantee we will miss the grind here in like 6 months where we're just begging for games to be played, but ready to transition to offseason, so this should be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm excited as well, and that's what we do, man. So everybody that's checking this out for the first time, if this is your first Destination Chill, if you haven't been around, like, this is what we do. The type of content that we're going to produce starting now is going to be, and we'll try to make it very applicable to everybody, very evergreen, some things that you can go back, reflect on 2-3 months down the line, and these conversations and these ideas and these theories and these principles will still be applicable at that point in time, Scott. But some fun stuff. You and I, we are in multiple leagues together. I think we've got one league where we're in the championship together. We've lost in some semifinals together, but we face off together in a league, Scott. So that's going to be fun to go into week 17 and facing off against one another. But just excited, man. Excited for the offseason and excited for this episode in particular because you spend a lot of time talking about how to construct rosters in season, right before the season starts, how to draft, how to position your team to optimize, fantasy points and potential points that your roster can accumulate. But what we don't talk about a ton, Scott, is at the end of the season, how to deconstruct that roster to prep it for the construction that's going to take place after the rookies matriculate onto the NFL, after new free agent veterans find new landing spots, or after some of the players retire that are in the league right now. And there could be a lot of that happening across all three fronts. So that's what this show is going to be. We are going to deconstruct a roster and talk about what you need to do at this point in time. Because listen, just because you're out of the playoffs does not mean in Dynasty you should go away, tune out, and we'll catch back up in May, in March, and April when the rookies come in. You've got to start your deconstruction process now. And the way that I framed it to you, Scott, was if you go out to build a house, you don't just find a plot of land and just start pouring concrete, laying the foundation, and building the house. You've got to pave everything. You got to smooth things out, clear out that space. Make sure your foundation is solid to what you build on. It's going to last and maintain. So we're going to do that today. We're actually going to look at one of your rosters, Scott, and start talking about some things, how to take it apart, how to deconstruct it, and get it ready to elevate back up, and we're going to use some of the tools over on the website. So quick plug for everything that we're doing. If you are down to the wire in your fantasy leagues and you need help, Scott's got a Did It service that you can actually call him, set it up, and if he's got some space and availability, you can actually talk one-on-one with him to help you try to get that chip. You can go to dynastytradesand5.com to get your full rosters reviewed. Do the one where you get me, Scott, and Shane, and then go to dd.com. Join the Discord. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to be inside of that service because there's nothing like it in fantasy. You get to engage with us and over 100 other people in a private channel, voice, video, daily. So go over to destinationnavigator.com, check all of that out. But deconstruction, Scott, just talk about when you hear that word, we know what construction is, but when you think about deconstructing a roster, Give me some stuff. What should people think when they hear that?
Well, I mean, a couple things. So this is the time where most leagues, they're done after this week, meaning waivers don't run anymore. A lot of the activity will start to drop off. And so this is the week, this period of time, this 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. Now your rules may be a little different. I have some leagues where we have waivers that run throughout the off season and whatever and that kind of stuff. But this is the week where you are essentially going through, looking at what worked, looking at what didn't work, looking at what you were carrying just for the last month, stuff that was on your roster where you go, man, I don't really see a path. And you have to think of anything as an opportunity cost. Everything you're holding is an opportunity cost of it's a roster spot. It's the lack of flexibility going forward. So you have a limited time to do this. So you got to look at every team in the next 3 or 4 days and say, what is the purpose of having that player? What is the purpose of going in this direction? And be willing to go out there and say, I'm trying to strive for a reset. Deconstruction, to deconstruct properly, you have to be able to reset. And you have to go, okay, this is okay to let go. Embracing the fact that everything is going to start over. When January hits, we don't care about what happened last year anymore. If it impacts what can happen in the future, then by all means, embrace that. But for a lot of our rosters, a lot of what is there had a purpose last year.
Right.
Had a purpose in week 15, week 16. You were holding that backup quarterback or that backup running back for what could happen. And it's not going to happen now. So embrace the fact that everything's going to reset. And I'll just go back to the roster construction series. Listen to it on Destination Devy's podcast feed. The purpose of roster construction is to start the year on the right track. It's like a New Year's resolution. By December of next year, am I going to be following that exact same plan or resolution?
Right.
Probably not. But I'm starting with the best spot that I can begin with, which is why we're going to go through, cut some dead weight, figure out some deals we might be able to make in the first month or two, embracing the fact that nobody knows anything in January or February. Nothing's happened. So embrace the fact that you're resetting and you're setting yourself up to, okay, if I'm right going into next year, I'm starting at the best possible place, understanding that a lot's going to change. So just think about it as a cleanse, as a New Year's Eve resolution that I'm going to cleanse on January 1st. That's exactly what you're doing for your dynasty roster. And then things are going to slowly spiral out of control. There's going to be things that happen in March and April and May and June that you didn't expect, and you're going to have to adapt. But just cleanse yourself. That's literally what we're doing with this roster review today. So just say that and approach all your teams that way going into the offseason.
Well, let's pull it up, Scott. Let's pull up one of your leagues, and this is a league that is on Sleeper. Can you just give us some quick settings and all of that good stuff? I got the league pulled up right now on the War Tool. You can access this on destinationdevy.com.
Yeah, and you can listen along to the roster construction series because this is very similar. So this is a 12-team Superflex start 11, 30-man rosters that expands to 33 in the offseason. So remember that. I get 3 extra roster spots to play with in the offseason. There's no taxi, nothing like that. And there will be like a cut down point where everyone has to activate their IR and all of that kind of stuff to get in roster compliance. But it's a 12-team start 11, 30-man rosters that expands to 33. The nuances of the scoring, it's really not that complicated. It is 5 point per passing touchdown. So we're hedging our bets between 4 and 6. Mm-hmm. And then it is additional point for tight end receptions. And that's it. There is small bonuses for like first downs, but that's it. There's no other fancy scoring or anything. And it's just straight forward 12 teams, start 11. It is a median scoring league. So you're playing 2 head-to-head matchups, but it's a lineup league. So very similar to the roster construction series in terms of the formatting. So that's kind of what we're going to highlight. And the reason we picked this one, or at least I told you to go through this one and kind of grill me on it, is because, Ray, I'm not exactly in compliance here. If you listen to this, you're gonna look at this roster and go, there are some things that we can discuss, and that's something that I got to work on. Maybe not in the next couple of days, but definitely in the next month or two. And then one more caveat on this: this is a trades in 5 league. So I have to assume everyone in this league is listening to the roster construction series, is watching this video. So I'm not going to be able to go in and just go, well, I can take advantage of randoms out there and get into compliance or do stuff easier. It's actually going to be harder because there's probably other teams in this league that are trying to do the exact same thing as me. So those are the nuances. Those are the caveats. We can go through the war and kind of look at the scoring. But that's the overview of the league.
For the people who are listening and not watching on YouTube, which you should be doing both, can I read off the roster for those folks just so they can hear and just have an idea? Can I read off your roster for people?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So your quarterbacks, you have Russell Wilson, Josh Dobbs, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Tyrod Taylor, CJ Beathard, Mike White. Those are your quarterbacks. Running backs, Derrick Henry, James Conner, Tyler Algier, Keaton Mitchell, Antonio Gibson, Samaje Perine, Kenneth Gainwell, Damian Harris, and Zamir White. Your tight ends are TJ Hawkinson, David Njoku, Dalton Schultz, Hunter Henry, Darren Waller, Noah Fant, and Mike Gesicki. And your wide receivers are Stephon Diggs, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams, Tyler Lockett, Romeo Doubs, Hollywood Brown, and Jahan Dotson, Scott. So I'm going to pull up, for those of you, again, listening and not watching, we're on the website using the tool live, so this is sort of a tutorial of how to use the war tool as well. But you say you always start off on the 3-year average war chart. In any league that you look at, this is your first stop. So go ahead, let's start deconstructing this roster, talking about what you need to do with some of the players that you currently have rostered. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I do when I pull up one of these leagues. And I don't mind if people put this into their war tool. They can put in my username, Charles Chill FFB, as you can see it on the screen. DTI5 Hammers is the league, and then just select my team. So you can literally follow along if you have the war tool. But this is the first thing I look at. I look at the 3-year average war, and it's obviously going to update after this year, so that'll be interesting how some of these change when you throw 2023 in there, because 2023, right, doesn't look exactly like 2022 or 2021, but it's an aggregate of the last 3 years, which I think is probably, would you agree, the best way that we can probably forecast just generally what it's going to look like in the future if you take 3 years of a sample size and look at the league, look at the distribution of scoring in the war and say, okay, generally, this is what I'm going to look at when I'm going through my roster construction. So I look at that, and the first thing I always look at is I want to know how impactful are quarterbacks in my league, and I also want to know where does the war line take a dump at quarterback in my league. So you can see that on the screen. Ray will highlight the red or pink line, whatever it is to you, where the quarterback war is relative to the other positions. I think generally in lineup leagues, you can pretty much expect the tight end line is going to look something like this, where it's just lower than everything pretty much across the board. Now, this is a 2 PPR league, which is interesting because the tight ends matter a little bit more here, but you can even see in a 2 PPR league how much less they matter blow for blow, player for player than the other 3 positions. But you notice that pink line, Ray, is very much, even in a 5-point per passing touchdown league, it's almost just exactly the same as the receivers and running backs. Not saying they don't matter, but it also tells me the first thing I'm going to realize here is, and you can tell by my roster construction, I don't know if I necessarily need to pay the market ticket for the elite QBs. They're good to have, but the cost of a Herbert, a Burrow, those types, relative to a receiver or running back in the same range, assuming I'm probably starting anybody in that high-end range every week to begin with, the quarterbacks are probably going to be valued more on the market than wide receiver 7, 8, 9, right? You do a startup, what did we have, 8 or 9 quarterbacks in the first round? Yeah. And we didn't get to wide receiver 9 or 10 until round 3 of the startup, or around that range. So right there, it tells me quarterbacks might be a little overvalued, hence the reason this was an auction. I punted quarterback. I traded a bunch of quarterbacks. I ended up with Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, Aaron Rodgers, traded for Geno Smith, traded for Russell Wilson, picked up a bunch of backups. So that was the first takeaway, is I don't need to pay for the elite QBs because they were going for what you would expect, 30, 40% of your budget.
$300-400.
So I faded QB, which is the reason why my QB room, when you read it off, people are probably going, where's the good QBs on that list? But I don't think they matter. And I also think if you look at where that red line drops off, I mean, where does that start to dip? Wide receiver, quarterback 14, 15?
Yeah, let's go down here. Yeah, 13, 14, 15. And for those of you not watching, there are 4 colored lines that are indicated on the tool. Each line represents a tight end, quarterback, running back, wide receiver. And what you're talking about, Scott, is these lines, what you want to see, the positional advantages, if you see one line, one position way above the others, right? And then you say, oh man, those are the assets that are the premium assets. But what we're seeing right now is it's very tight at the top, Scott. Very tight. These lines are, they're almost overlapping. They're so close you can't even get to like quarterback 5. It's buried back there behind the RBs, right? So you're saying that as you're looking at this, and this is 3-year average, Scott, wins above replacement, there isn't this huge differentiator to say that you have to have the QB4 or the QB5. Like you've got to get whomever that is, opposed to maybe a different position, right?
Yeah, essentially you're looking at something that looks like this, and then you're going to the market values and saying, all right, does the league view the QB 4, 5, 6, 7, 8
right
way higher than the elite running backs and the other elite receivers? Generally, leagues are going to go, man, and I keep mentioning the Burrow, the Herbert, that Lamar tier where people think those guys are elite QBs. Generally, those are going to fetch more from like a skill player perspective. And if you see a Warren line that looks like this, not that I would not take those guys over a receiver or running back, because I think they are easier to predict from year to year, but I'm not going, man, I'm going to give you CeeDee Lamb in a first for Joe Burrow, right? The war says that's not a good bet.
Correct.
If anything, it's a free first for the team that's getting the free first. So that's the takeaway with this. And then a lot of people ask questions about, okay, that red line starts to dip down. Like it falls like a rock. Does that mean those QBs don't matter? No. Because the war is still, you look at what, QB 15 on here, still 1.2 war. Assuming it's in your lineup, you're still getting production from that spot. What it tells me, though, is after that range, right where it starts to go below 1, I don't care who I have in that range, which is why I think the backup QB strategy is even more pertinent in a league like this, because some of those backups that are on my roster that you named out, that I'm sitting here looking at guys like, Sam Darnold. I know he's not on my roster, but Jarrett Stidham, Mike White, those types. Basically, what this war is saying is that if those are spot starts, they probably exist in this quarterback 16 to 26 range on a weekly basis, versus Geno Smith's probably in that range too, right? But he has value because someone thinks he's a starter. Someone thinks, oh man, Russell Wilson and Geno Smith, they are locked in starters next year. Now, I'm looking at it as the gap between how many backup quarterbacks can I hold versus how many of those sub quarterback 15 or so QBs do I need to have. And if someone goes, hey, I'm willing to give you a couple backups and a couple seconds for Russell Wilson, that's a smart move based on the war. Really, all I'm giving up is the quote-unquote guaranteed starts, but I can roster construct my way out of that if I hold enough QBs. So that's what this line means to me is I don't value those mid to low QB2s anything more than they are just spot starters, yet someone else probably sees them as, man, that's a locked-in guy with a job. And so you're willing to kind of play in the market range where all of those guys are willing to be moved if it helps me in another spot. So that's how I read this war chart at QB.
All right, well, let's start deconstructing this roster. So now I've switched to, because it's just easier for me to identify the team, and visually, this is just cleaner for people watching. And we'll go through, and it's only showing the top 50. So if they're outside the top 50, they don't pull up on here. But let's just go through one more time. Here are your quarterbacks. So you've got Russell Wilson, Josh Dobbs, Geno Smith, and Daniel Jones, who positionally, based on the war, are top 50 quarterbacks based on their total war. Your running back room, your tight end room, and your wide receiver room. So, Scott, where do we start? Where do we start? And I'm going to go to your team right here because we've already got it filtered. Where do you want to start at dead weight that we need to shed to deconstruct this roster? Let's just take it position by position, and let's look at your quarterbacks. And the ones that we didn't name, Aaron Rodgers, Tyrod Taylor, C.J. Beathard, and Mike White. We're at the end of the season. What did this team finish? What was the record of this roster? What was the record? Where did you finish at? Are you in the chip? Did you make the playoffs? What happened?
No. This team finished 17-11. It missed the playoffs, and it lost in the toilet bowl. So this was a true middle of the pack team that, I thought had good roster construction. It obviously got hit with some injuries and whatever, but middle of the pack team that needs some work. So in terms of quarterbacks, I'll just say this, because of the way I'm built, I'm probably looking to go and continue to add any of the quarterbacks I think could be backups, because that's kind of how the roster's already built. So there's some gross names on there. Jarrett Stidham, C.J. Beathard, Jake Haener, Mike White. I just put out the pod on any quarterback on a 2 deep, and I literally went through every QB in the NFL. We covered over 80 QBs in that episode. So these names are fluid, but I'm holding 10, right? And I'm probably looking for opportunities where if a couple more quarterbacks get cut, I'm willing to add even more backups.
You want to continue to hold Mike White, C.J. Beathard through the off season. You want them now. Okay.
Correct.
And we're not going to dive into all of that because you literally just talked about this. So I highly recommend people go back and listen to that episode. Take out your notebook. So since we're there, because a lot of people would say, man, you need to cut Mike White. You need to get rid of C.J. Beathard. Why are you holding Tyrod Taylor? Most people would say you need to shed that from your roster. And again, if you're catching on late, we're talking a lineup league, not best ball, lineup. We'll do another episode, deconstruction, over best ball format. But if we're solid at quarterback, Scott, if you're comfortable with holding those guys, let's move on to the running back position where I think there'll be a lot more conversation. And again, just 30-second snapshot as to why you want to hold those backup QB2s. You just did a whole full show on it, but quick 30-second snapshot of why you want to carry those guys in the offseason.
Well, the war tells the story. The way that I'm constructed, I probably am going to need to leverage that construction to get quarterback production outside of what I already have. And then the other reality is this is a sharp league with a lot of trades and 5 managers that listen to the show, that follow the content. In my opinion, there's nothing else better to be rostering out there on waivers. There's a lot of clogger tight ends. There's a lot of clogger receivers, and we'll get to that in a second. That's probably where I need to shed. So, there's just nothing else out there to roster, to be honest. It's deep enough. It's going to be 33-man rosters. A lot of on the waiver wire, I don't see a practical use for rostering them into the offseason. So that's the short answer.
All right, Scott. So we're going to have some fun now because I'm looking at the running back position and the highest WAR running backs that you have. You've got Derrick Henry, who will be 30 years old. You have James Conner, another older veteran. Tyler Algier, Keaton Mitchell. We know what happened to him. And Antonio Gibson. Those are just a few, but you've got other running backs on your roster. Samaje Perine, Kenneth Gainwell, Damian Harris, Amir White, and there may be some others that aren't pulling up on here. But let's talk about this position because you, my friend, have been very, very vocal about, there's not a lot of running backs that you want to roster in the offseason and hold. And I tend to agree with you that you can buy a lot of these guys at all points of time. But here's the thing. Once the rookie season really starts to pick up, and we can talk about the 24 class being bad at running back all we want, but there will be running backs drafted in the NFL draft that land in spots that there's probably going to be some opportunity. And whomever it is, I don't know if it's going to be Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. And honestly, Scott, at this point, I don't give a damn what the name is. I just know that there will be running backs that are talented, Marshawn Lloyd, whomever it is, that land in spots where there's going to be some opportunity. So let's start with your running back group. And how do we take this apart? How do we deconstruct this to clear off some dead weight? Just looking at it, seems like Damian Harris is quite dead weight that you're holding. Samaje Perine, Keaton Mitchell, and even a Derrick Henry, James Conner. Are those not players that you can move, try to liquidate, get some capital, and use that flexibility in the offseason with seconds, thirds, whatever it is, to invest in some young players?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a running back room that is advanced to the lowest common denominator of value, right? There's not many guys on this list that probably hold much off-season value. What they do hold is probably somebody that thinks they can buy one of these guys next year, a team that's maybe up and coming that goes, I'm willing to buy a guy like Derrick Henry or James Conner for next year. Now, those guys still have to survive the offseason, so I don't think there's a big market that exists for them between now and early March. There's probably going to be a time where it's just they're better off being on my roster. But it is still an any running back on a 53 approach. And some of these guys you mentioned, Damian Harris, Samaje Perine, probably very little value. Keaton Mitchell, now that he's got a blown knee, those are probably ones where if there's a better option out there, if there's a guy I can refresh in the rookie draft or I can pick up off waivers, like those are probably the first candidates that can go. So I'm willing to kind of.
But you're not just flat out, because we're talking deconstruction. So you're not just flat out dropping these players. You're not just going to drop them. But I mean, in a real question, could you not? Kenneth Gainwell just had a big week, or at least some enthusiasm from his week that he had some nice runs in that game versus the Giants. Is that not a player that you'd be willing to move for a third-round pick? Would you move Kenneth Gainwell, or is that something that you want to hold on for more, or is that not worthy of a third-round pick? Zamir White and what he's done over the past couple of weeks. Here's my theory behind this, Scott. I think you're right that the market for a Derrick Henry, a James Conner, Tyler Algier, probably very little right now, because those are assets that are best used for scoring points. So unless you can move them right now for a contender that can score some points, there's probably going to be little market value for them between the months of February through May. Like, honestly, it's probably just going to be, I don't know, we need to see. But conversely, I do think that towards the end of the season, people start to tell themselves a story of hope, the story of hope. And the hope is, man, Josh Jacobs isn't going to be a Raider next year. Zamir White going into year 3, stud. Look at what he just did versus Kansas City. Kenneth Gainwell, they should have been giving him the ball all damn season. Kenneth Gainwell he's going to get more opportunity next year. And you know what? Antonio Gibson, all he needs is a change in scenery. They don't know how to use him right in Washington, so things are going to get better for him. So I'm looking at those 3 assets in particular. While they don't have the production value as a Henry or Connor, they definitely have some hopium built inside of their name. And I think those are 3 players, 3 running backs that I would be personally looking to move off for that hopium. And I want to do that before the rookie season process gets going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at running backs that are in that range, those are ones where it's probably appropriate to do an auto accept trade block on them and just put them up there and say, any third. Keaton Mitchell, I'd pretty much take any pick at this point. Those are guys where I can trade them if I can get a pick. There's a couple other running backs. I'm looking at the waivers right now. There's a couple other running backs where I go, all right, I could slide a guy like Kevin Harris in place of one of those guys. For all intents and purposes, they're the same thing. They're a body. They're on a cheap contract. They're either are or not going to have a role, but I don't think he's any worse of a bet than Damian Harris to have a role in the NFL. They're the same thing for off-season purposes. So if I could get a third, a fourth, something of liquid value for a couple of those guys like you mentioned, because someone might want Antonio Gibson. Man, he's finally hitting free agency. Kenneth Gainwell. Man, they may give him the same role or better next year because all their other running backs are going to be gone. Like that type of small window. And again, the value is not, you and I don't look at those guys as they are. We don't even look at the name, right? We are looking as they fill a spot on my team. They're a running back. And the other thing that people don't really appreciate that I learned the hard way last year, just how much running back movement exists between January and forget about in season. We're just talking January to September. If you would have told me, hey, can you name any running back on a 53 in April? I'd go, yeah, I can. Then the rookie draft hits. Then we get to preseason, and there's no joke, Ray, at least a dozen rookies, running backs, that I've hardly even heard of. That you're going, man, Elijah Dotson, got to pick up him. Emmanuel Wilson, got to pick him up.
Chris Brooks, right. And who's that guy?
And the reality is those guys are players that and you know almost every player, and you're sitting there going, man, I got to look up Elijah Dotson. Who the hell is this guy? But he's got a chance to be a running back on a 53 just as much as Damian Harris does. So to say, man, I can't give up on Kenneth Gainwell because I've seen him be on a 53 for 3 years, it's a little short-sighted because really you're just getting attached to the name. There's going to be, the theme here is there is going to be 100 opportunities, literally, between now and the start of next year to find a new random running back body on your waiver wire if you only have 30 roster spots. People can't roster them all. Let alone, there's a lot of people that are so outside of good roster construction, they're wasting 10 spots by rostering a bunch of receivers, a bunch of extra tight ends. So just assume there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and there's also a couple backup QBs on waivers still that I'd be willing to free the spot, have one less running back, and pick up another QB. So the idea is I think I got to do an auto-accept trade block. And
who goes on there?
Truthfully, Ray, I think a price goes on every player. Now, is someone going to give me a 205 for James Conner? Probably not. But is there a player on there you would not auto-accept trade block on? Even if maybe I'm okay with not taking a deal right now, it feels like all 9 of them should have a price, right? Like none of them are good enough to hold through the offseason, I think, without any disruption.
I think so. The 2 that I do believe, and we said this at the very beginning of this particular position conversation, that their value, I feel like James Conner and Derrick Henry are 2 that their value will probably best be realized closer to the season, but that doesn't mean I've got to hold them up until September, right? Because here's the thing. Derrick Henry, if there are any of the 2 that I would be like, I need at least a second, it would be Conner and Henry. I do not believe that the Cardinals, based on their draft capital, and we'll see what happens in free agency, I don't think James Conner's getting replaced. They may bring somebody in. He dealt with some injuries, but I think between DeMarcado, the assets and what they're building right now, James Conner's probably a good bet to at least be a body on Arizona next year. And Derrick Henry is a really good bet to be on a different team. And can you imagine, Scott, if Henry landed on Philadelphia or Dallas or the Rams or some other team? He's probably not a first, but you're definitely getting a second and a player for Derrick Henry, right? So those would be the only 2 I've got a little trepidation on, but I would put all 9 of them on the block. I've got 2 players I want to ask you quickly about, and it's the hopium of these guys. Zamir White, really quickly, just talk about Zamir and how you're proceeding with him, because a lot of the conversation is locked and loaded stud next year. He's going to be the starter, bell cow running back. Look at what he did versus Kansas City, and you've got said asset on your roster. So just realistically, I'm sure you don't want to, a third isn't what you have in mind, but talk about Zamir White and deconstructing him.
Well, I mean, unlike guys like Conner and Henry, where you and I don't care if those guys have players join their backfields, they have such a history with wherever they are, they're going to get numerous opportunities to get the workload. Now, if they fall off a cliff, they may lose it. But there is no worry of Derrick Henry or James Conner are somewhere where they bring in a 3rd-round running back or they sign another guy in free agency. So that's why they're already to the point where it's like they are what they are. They're going to have a purpose. It's just, when do I move them? With guys like Zamir White, I kind of wonder, has the community, because 2 years ago, right, people would have been already talking about how Zamir White's the starter next year for the Raiders, meaning he's already worth a second. There's a chance he could be a guy that's elevated into an even higher tier because they don't replace him. But the reality is he's a day 3 running back himself. Barely saw the field until the running back that was ahead of him didn't play. But I think he also showed in 2 games, like, he belongs on a depth chart. He belongs somewhere where he's the next man up at minimum. So what does that mean? It means I'm not going to get too excited about, man, because Josh Jacobs is going to leave in free agency. And then we're banking there's going to be a window where, man, what if they don't replace him? And the reality is they're probably going to replace him with 2 guys, and he's going to have to earn the job over again. He's going to have to earn just the role he was in this year again. So is he untradeable? No, but would I say I'm just excited to dump him for any pick? No, because I think there is a world where he is a he has a Jamal Williams type. He's a Deontay Foreman type where, hey, like he's got a role and he's someone I can get numerous spot starts out of. So he's probably a second. Reality is this league is too smart to pay a second. So it probably looks something like I get a third and maybe another body that's a worse bet than Zamir White. But that's the kind of creativeness you have to have with trading a player like that. You're not going to get what you want. You're not going to get the hopium price of what a random Twitter follow will tell you to buy for. Mm-hmm. But you're probably going to find somebody willing to give you a lesser, I'll just throw out a name. I know we're not really high on this guy, but someone may give you a Zach Evans or an Izzy Abanikanda and a third for Zamir White. And the reality is they kind of are the same bet, They're going to have a chance to have a role. And that's really what I'm looking at. So that's probably what you got to do with them. That's how you get rid of them in a league that knows what they're doing.
And last one, because we have not even mentioned his name, Tyler Algier, Scott. Tyler Algier. And listen, I do believe there's no doubt that Bijan is the more talented, more gifted runner of the two. But Algier is Jamal Williams. Like he is proficient enough to earn, call him Jamal Williams, call him Gus Edwards. He's probably that. And I don't believe that he's the type of running back that is going to be relegated to holding the clipboard all game long. So again, not that we are wanting to hold and keep any of these guys, but he is the quintessential any RB on a 53 right there is Tyler Algier.
Yeah, and honestly, when you mention Algier, I kind of want to buy more Algier types on teams like this. Man, can I flip Antonio Gibson for a second and an Algier? The reality is I probably got the better innings eater, and I got an asset on top. Like that, he's the type of guy I want to buy. We've talked about A.J. Dillon before. He's another A.J. Dillon where it's just like he's going to be a plotter placeholder. Yep. But I guarantee you they're going to give him the opportunity to have that role until he shows he can't hold it anymore. And that might mean, no joke, it might be 4 or 5 more years of Tyler Algier in a similar role where I go, damn, I started him 10 times over that 5-year period. And all he was going for was 2/3 or a third to fourth.
Yep.
Like the equity you're getting. Now, if you don't have the right, here's the major problem, right? If you're buying Tyler Algiers, and then you're parking him behind 4 other Tyler Algiers, and you don't have the way to actually use him during the year when you could have used him,
right?
What was the point?
Yeah, it's inefficiency.
So I think the construction here of having more Algiers on a roster makes me more likely to be able to play him when I know I can start him versus he's buried behind Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, and Travis Etienne. Like a team like that, why am I buying Tyler Algiers? Because I'm not reselling him for a profit.
And you're not starting him. So the takeaway from at least this positional section of deconstruction is these two right here. We are, first of all, Scott, is it fair to say that we are very open to selling all 9 of these running backs if we can? Like we're 100%. Very open to selling all 9 right now if the offer comes through. But if you've got to hold, right, you're fine holding on to Henry and Connor and Algier for a later date. But the reality is we probably need to get some of these guys, the P-Runs, the Gibsons, the Mitchells on an auto-accept trade block. Is that fair? A fair assessment of at least this positional group?
Yeah, probably want to shed 1 or 2 of those guys and try to get some capital because they're literally replaceable by random shots off waivers. And this league does run waivers during the offseason. So it's even more advantageous for me to free up some roster spots. Because in February, there's going to be someone I go, damn, I kind of want to pick up Kevin Harris. He's just floating out there, and he's going to be on the Patriots next year as a guy on the 53. Like, I need a spot for him. So if I can get a 4th for Samaje Perine, it's a free 4th. Because I'm literally replacing him with another player that fits the exact same purpose on my roster.
Well, let's move to the wide receiver position, Scott, and talk about your receivers: Stephon Diggs, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams, Tyler Lockett, Romeo Doubs, Hollywood Brown, Jahan Dotson. I mean, good names of all the receivers that you're carrying currently right now. What are we doing with this one? Because you've got some elite guys. You go use the Trinity tool over on the website. Stephon Diggs and Brandon Ayuk are both an elite. They're in the upper right quadrant of the Trinity. Devontae Adams, lower right quadrant, but at the top. And then you've got Lockett, Dobbs, Brown, Dotson kind of clustered in the middle. what are we doing here? What are we doing with this position? Do you feel comfortable with the receivers that you have? I see some ADV right there with Jahan Dotson. That'd be one that I wouldn't mind shedding if I could. I don't. This is just my assessment. I don't know. Can you get some hopium for Hollywood? I think that there are better days ahead for Hollywood Brown. Just hasn't clicked. Kyler came back mid-year. They haven't been able to work anything out. You look at the passing and the distribution of targets right now. It's just a mess. They need another receiver there. And I honestly think Marvin Harrison Jr., if that is the selection paired with Hollywood, will actually be really good for Hollywood Brown moving forward. But just talk about your receiver room. Scott, I'm just asking you, are we starting to see that Diggs decline? You know, Ayuk is really good. Adams, pretty good. Probably going to have a rookie quarterback next year. And you look at Seattle and Jackson Smith and Jigba starting to eat in to old man Tyler Lockett's opportunity. So what do you want to do here at the receiver position, and what type of deconstruction tips and principles can you talk about for the people watching this video or listening to this to take away from this position? Now, you're only holding 7. You only got 7 right now, opposed to 9 running backs and 52 quarterbacks. So what are we doing here with the wide receivers?
Well, that's the good news. There's not a ton of dead weight here. There's either ADV or there's useful receivers, right? So that's the first thing. If your list, when you go to your team, continues down and you got a Brandon Powell and you got a Charlie Jones and maybe you're holding a Devontae Parker because for some reason you picked him up one week, like those are the guys where you go, all right, Ray, am I holding Devontae Parker into the offseason? No. You just free the roster spot, go to the running backs, go to the quarterbacks. That's the worst place you want to hold players. But go back to the 3-year war. I want to kind of highlight something for everybody here. Okay. So you notice the tight end line. Go to tight end 5 all the way to like tight end 15 to 20 range, right? So you're talking like maybe 0.7 to 1.3, 1.4 war, something like that. Is that fair? Like there's a range, right?
Yep.
Now, go to the wide receiver like 30 to 50 range and look at the war range in there.
Let's go to the wide receiver. Here we go.
What do you notice?
Yeah.
What do you notice?
Got 0.82.
Similar, right?
There. Yeah, similar.
So what that tells me is that in that range, outside of probably Adams, Diggs, and Ayuk, and then outside of the top 3 or 4 tight ends, I can probably look at that like low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2, let's call it tight end 5 to 20. I can probably look at that as very similar to these wide receiver 3s, 4s, and 5s that Lockett, Dotson, Dobbs, those guys occupy on my team. Hollywood Brown, I agree with you. He's probably a guy that you value a little higher than what the market does. But I'm looking, for all intents and purposes, I'm looking at the tight ends and the receivers in that range very much similar. And I actually think that the tight ends in that range, so you go a little bit lower, the tight ends in the range of, you see Logan Thomas pop up there. But if you just kind of speculate forward, guys like Cade Otton, Chiga Okonkwo, like those types.
There they go.
While I don't love them, if you're talking a 2 PPR league, they are just as flex worthy as Romeo Dobbs, Jahan Dotson. But which ones do I think I can probably exploit the market or a guy like Hunter Henry, no market value. But I bet if you look up his WAR, you go, man, you probably could have flexed him at the same rate as you could have flexed Romeo Dobbs.
There it is.
And which one has value and which one doesn't. So the idea here is I can even go slimmer at receiver. Now I got to start 3. But I can probably cash in some of that ADV on guys like Dobbs and Jahan Dotson with the goal of, I think it'll be easier to mine the tight end position in the gross range to fill those flexes, basically.
Well, Scott,
so that's the takeaway here.
And right here, Hunter Henry, if we filter this by total WAR for your roster, Hunter Henry, 0.82, is higher than Tyler Lockett, Darren Waller, Romeo Dobbs, Jahan Dotson. WAR per game. Let's just go per game WAR. Hunter Henry 0.06. You've got Romeo Doubs 0.03. So per game more, you get a little more per game, a tad bit more out of Hunter Henry. Out of Romeo Doubs and Hunter Henry, you get a little bit more out of Romeo Doubs from that per game perspective. But I think you're spot on with how to use the 3-year average and trying to parse through the different ranges. And both of those guys, I mean, Jahan Dotson, I don't even know where he's at on here. I mean, it's pure
It's
ADV.
negative.
Yeah, it's negative. It's
pure AD.
It's pure ADV.
It's pure
right
ADV.
there. It's pure
Yep.
ADV. Negative WAR.
And that's why I'm rostering. Normally, I would barbecue somebody for holding this many tight ends. But that's why I'm holding Njoku, Schultz, Darren Waller, Hunter Henry, because I'm looking at them as essentially I'm adding my tight ends in with my threshold receivers and going, all right, I probably need – on my roster construction series, I mentioned I only want to roster 2 tight ends, and then I want to roster 7 receivers, right? So if you add those together, Ray, I probably need some combination of like 10 receivers and or tight ends. But if it's 5 and 5, if it's 6 and 4, I'm good with that because I think some of the tight ends I have, guys like Waller, there's really no market value for Waller. But in a 2 PPR, I could tell you a world where he plays 10 games next year and his WAR is higher than a lot of those wide receiver 2s and even a lot of the wide receiver 3s that people are going to value higher because, well, they're a young receiver. So I think you can hack this a little bit by saying, all right, which receivers can I sell? Can I sell Jahan Dotson? I don't even need to get a tight end back, right? But I bet you if I put him on the block and I went fishing for some of the tight ends that have kind of lost their luster, I mean, it's not an accident that I have held on to Noah Fant and Mike Gesicki. People are going, those guys are dead weight. But Ray, I could also tell you a story where both of those guys in a 2 PPR, you could go, all right, there could be a path. Now, am I going to hold on for another year and another year and another year? Not necessarily. But I could see the path there just as I could see the same path for Dotson or Romeo Doubs. They're all the same. And which ones have value and which ones don't. Does Noah Fant have any trade value, Ray?
No.
Mike Gesicki, any trade value? At all?
No.
But Romeo Doubs probably has a little. Jahan Dotson probably still has a little. So immediately I gravitate towards try to sell those guys. Now the question is, and this is kind of where I'd ask your opinion, is knowing what we just know. What if you had those two? Clearly they're liquidation candidates where you're saying, if I can free up a roster spot, if I can get some capital, I'm doing it. But what do you ask for knowing the motivation is to kind of get rid of them versus it is, I don't even want to go into next year with Jahan Dotson.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he's that good. You look at the Trinity tracker, he's not good.
No.
Romeo Doubs is replaceable by guys that people would say have much lower value. So, what is the sweet spot to where, sure, I'm not giving them away, but I really don't want them on my roster in March, given those roster spots are valuable. What would you try to sell them for?
So this is where, Scott, you are the roster construction GOAT, but I am the dynasty mind game savant, and I play the psychology in this so much. Here's the linchpin with Jahan Dotson. There will be hype and enthusiasm with whatever new coach gets announced. I think that you probably need to move him before the draft because for 2 years, he has not been the type of complement with the capital that they've invested to where I do believe that they're bringing somebody else in. And once that happens, his value is about to get absolutely blown to smithereens. So what you're really hoping for is somehow some miracle, some Christmas Week 17 miracle where he plays well versus San Francisco, puts up some points. But honestly, Scott, right now, if you look at the Trinity, you look at what he's doing, the total WAR on the season is just, he's the worst receiver that you have on your team. And you probably go pull up his KTC value, and it's probably a little bit higher than it probably needs to be. You're not getting this 2/3. I'd be fine with re-rolling Jahan Dotson. If I can get 2/3 for Jahan Dotson, I'm totally fine with that. Take a shot on some rookies, use those thirds to package up some other shit and try to move up higher. But he's the type of piece that you have to add to a trade. He's the type of piece that I think I'd be fine making the other side believe that they were gaining the leverage on me. I'll pay a little bit to get off of Jahan Dotson. So can I give you Jahan Dotson in a late third for a second? Can I give you Jahan Dotson and something else for a second and a pick, a player back? Can I package up, and I'm gonna go nuclear here. I wouldn't even be opposed to moving Diggs plus Dotson for an Ayukish tier type wide receiver. You have to get creative because independently, you're not going to be able to move Dotson for a second. It's not happening. Even 2/3 might be a stretch, Scott. So that's what I'm probably doing with my Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, and anyone stuck in a similar conundrum where they're going, man, the name of that player is higher than probably what my league will pay. Go through and use we're not talking about it necessarily on this video specifically, but go use the Trinity tracker. And this is a perfect situation for Trinity versus KTC, and pull them up on the graph. And then you know what? Basically what you just said, Ray, is when you pull the Trinity and the KTC and you look at the players you might want to get out of, go about 80% of that price. Don't ask for the 100% KTC, right? Go below it, because what you just said was, the benefit here is essentially I get the Jahan Dotson deal done for something I feel good about, versus nickel and diming somebody and going, well, there's going to be this window and he was a first-round pick. It's almost like the strength of the deal here is that I got the deal done. And I wiped my hands clean of a player that there's nothing that tells me is going anywhere but flatlining or falling. So why would I wait when I'm holding a falling knife? The benefit is getting him off my team and getting a third in a roster spot, right? The roster spot is part of what's valuable here, is freeing up the flexibility to do something else.
And look at that, Scott. So I pulled up the Trinity as we were talking, and here's Jahan Dotson. His KTC value, 33.25. Romeo Doubs, 29.67. Hollywood Brown, 33.44. And Tyler Lockett's value, 23.42. So Hollywood, Jahan Dotson.
Explain that to people when you look at this. What you're looking, the guys above the line are the sells, right? The guys on the upper left-hand corner are always sells, right?
Like what we're looking at right now is Trinity scores. So what they're actually doing in their offense to score fantasy points, wide receiver stuff, versus their value. You don't want to see somebody on the far left but high up in value. That is a sell. His Trinity is below 3.5, Scott. I mean, and this is total for the year, below 3.5 for Jahan Dotson. So it's factoring in the touchdowns, but yet he's valued on par with Hollywood Brown, whose Trinity score historically is in a range to where he is a legitimate wide receiver 3 on your roster, and he's below the regression line because he hadn't played. He's had Clayton Tune and Josh Dobbs at quarterback, but Jahan Dotson's more valuable than all these guys. Jahan Dotson,
Can I
Tyler
sell him
Lockett.
for another Tyler Lockett?
I mean, is that not found money? If you can trade your Dotson for Lockett in a third, Romeo, KTC is telling you that you can do this. You can pivot off of Dotson to Romeo Doubs plus based on the value, and I'm telling you, at this score, Scott, 3.14. What are you interested in holding him for besides the ADV?
Do you know why I'm interested in holding him? For this exact moment right here, where I can wait to the end of the year and go, can I trade him for DeAndre Hopkins, Ray? Because one's old and one was a former first rounder. Like that type of deal is exactly why you hold the hopium. I know you're throwing DeAndre Hopkins versus Jahan Dotson in there. Let's see it.
Yeah, let's just do it. Let's just pull it up and run it. And let's just see who's got more value. I think it's going to be Hop. I don't know. We're running this live. I think it's going to be Hopkins. I don't know. You don't know?
I know Hopkins like 6 weeks ago was absolutely crushed, but I'll be curious to see. I have not looked at his KTC in the last couple weeks, so it'll be interesting. Wow. Straight up, bro.
And
look at that.
Hopkins is, 27-15, 33-20. It's significant. I mean,
and that probably plummets after the year ends, right? Everyone with Hopkins is going to go, man, I didn't win the title. That goes down like 10%.
Especially if he doesn't play this week. Especially if he doesn't play this week. I mean, Hopkins is, and look at his score, 8.68. This is historically over the last 5 years. This puts him, based on wide receiver stuff, and there's other things, touchdown. He's in elite territory as far as what he's doing. And Jahan Dotson, look how far back he is. But yet make this make sense, Scott. He is value. It's the age. It's the hopium. It's the age. It's the opium. I mean, I think that on this roster that we're deconstructing, Dotson might be one of the more valuable wide receiver assets that you have relative to what he's actually producing for you from a fantasy production standpoint. He might be one of the more valuable assets that you have. I mean, we just saw that versus versus Dobbs and Lockett and Hollywood. His KTC value is higher than those guys. This is actually a nice trade chip that you have, and I would be exploring a move. Now, unfortunately, everyone in your league is going to watch this, but for those of you out there, this is how you use some of these tools to parse together information to paint a clearer picture. So I'm going to pull the war tool back up, Scott, and then we're going to wrap up this deconstruction episode.
Yeah, just to hit on one more thing that you said, Ray, was the idea that trade, when you put up that Trinity tool and you looked at Hopkins versus Dotson, essentially what the Trinity is telling you that anything because people are going to go, right, why are you trading for a 31-year-old receiver? But really, this trade is more of an indictment on Dotson, right? Really has nothing to do with Hopkins. If I can get a third, hell, if I can just get the DeAndre Hopkins production for one more year, you're basically saying that is worth more than Jahan Dotson's ADV.
100%.
That Trinity score is probably going to say what's going to happen to that ADP, Ray, if nothing changes. It's going to slowly dissipate, right?
Yep.
It's going to, in a year, you're going to be going, okay, he's Rashad Bateman. Mm-hmm. Where now there is no ADV.
None.
It's 3 years in, and all he's got was he's a former first-round pick. And then 4 years, he's Jalen Reagor. 5 years, he's outside a sleeper because he's not on a roster. Like, that's the way that it's trending. And I don't want to wish that on Jahan Dotson, but essentially you're just saying that give me anything that's useful.
He's Jalen Reagor. He's on his fourth team, and you randomly hear the name, and he catches some 40-yard pass, and it just – you're like, man, like what a bust, right? Yep. He's still there, but he's the clogger. And Dotson, because of the capital, he is going to continue to clog a lot of rosters for a long time, Scott. He is. He's going to continue to clog rosters for a very long time. So to put a bow on this, and we kind of lump tight end in with wide receiver, when you're looking to break down at the end of the season, just a couple of bullet points of what you're trying to accomplish and what you want dynasty managers to think about as they analyze their rosters. And if you're listening to this and you're watching this and you want a deeper, more thorough understanding of this, there are ways. You could reach out to us. I first of all suggest go to the website, get in the Discord, join the Heisman tier or the DTI 5 tier to get in and have these type of conversations, because we are literally, we're talking about this every damn day. Now, during the past week of Christmas, we haven't been as active because of family and friends, but this is what we do, Scott. So give the people some actionable takeaways of maybe 3 things that they should be doing right now. Their fantasy season is over. What are some of the things that they should be doing, plugging their team into the war, looking at Trinity, to just prep for construction that's going to take place later down the line?
Well, the first thing is pretty much do everything we did here. Look at the war, kind of have a vague idea of how you want to roster construct. That's not even going to be one of the bullet points. But I think after you do that, aside from all of the tools, something that we don't even have a great pulse on, but it's out there. If you do enough searching, you have to look at every player on your roster, and you need to be able to tell yourself the purpose as to why is that player on my team. Just look at the player and go, why are they on my team? Now, if you say, why is Samaje Perine on my team? I'll tell you, any running back on a 53. There isn't another reason, though. But that is a reason, right? I've roster constructed around that. But go through and you ask yourself, why is this player on my team? And if you genuinely cannot give a reason, and the reason is something like, well, I just haven't gotten around to filling those roster spots, or haven't gotten around to cutting those players yet, get to action. Like that's literally the first step, is admitting, hey, this is a problem. I need to change it. So go through that exercise and just say, okay, why is this player here? Now then, if you identify some of the things we talked about, the next step is to actually go out there and be the aggressor in proposing these trades. I just sent out Jahan Dotson for DeAndre Hopkins in a third, Ray. I sent it out. No one's going to send me that offer.
No.
Now, they may not want DeAndre Hopkins, But no one's coming to me and going, hey, that looks like an offer I'm going to send Scott. I would say 95% of the deals I get done, I send out the offer. Because the strength of the offer is I'm getting the deal done in the form of what I want the deal to be done.
Yes, sir.
Most likely the offers coming to Ray, coming to me, we may be interested in a trade, but the deal doesn't look like what I'm trying to get done. In fact, a lot of the offers I get are, here, Scott, I'll give you a lot of my cloggers. Here, I'm throwing in a KJ Osborne. I'm throwing in this guy and that guy. Like, that's the opposite of what I'm trying to do. And the only way I usually get done what I want to do is I send out the offers. And then the third thing is embrace the fact that the offseason has its own variance, meaning there's a lot of shit that's unpredictable. This is the worst time to dig your heels in on, I believe in Zamir White's profile. And I cannot move him because of what could happen. The reality is most of the situations, what you think could happen doesn't end up happening. And then you're always behind the market. Because let's say the Raiders bring in a free agent running back, Ray, and then they draft one in round 4. Then somebody in July is going to be going, hey, anyone want Zamir White? And it's already going to be at that point, you might as well just hold him because he's got more value on your team than anybody would give you anything for him. And so you're always going to be kind of behind the market, which is going to cause you to get less deals done. I mean, what did we point out last week or the week before on HVV, Ray? Our main Heisman League. Why did you and I have some of the most success this year, even though we didn't win? We didn't even have probably one of the top 5 teams.
Nope.
But we had the most moves. We were literally grinding week to week as the market went up, the market went down, the supply and demand on players went up and down. We were never afraid to go, hey, all right, I'll move that guy. I'll move this guy. And you got to act the same way in the offseason. Things move slower, but you cannot dig your heels in because it's going to lead to inactivity. And you may be okay with inactivity, but you won't win with inactivity. Someone else will be doing some of this stuff more aggressively than you, and you'll look up and go, damn, that person beat me at my own game. Literally, they beat Scott at his own game, winning with roster construction, winning with grinding the edges and grinding the margins. So those are the 3 things that everyone can do after you pull up the war tool and kind of look at generally where you want to be.
And I'll say this, my piece of advice to contribute to this is a lot of times we sit back and we think at the end of the season what to add in order to help us achieve the ultimate goal in which we failed at achieving this year. What can I buy? What do I need to add in order to win it? Y'all, it's December 27th. Y'all, it's December 27th. I'm not really trying to add a damn thing to win next season in December of 2023. Like, there's not my purpose and goal with my dynasty rosters right now is to make sure I have the room to add new fresh bodies, because here's the thing, as much as DeMarcus Robinson is smashing now, he will be dropped come July. Unless McVay comes out and says he's the wide receiver 2-3, those type of players will be dropped because you will want the litany of rookies that are going to fluctuate into the NFL. I'm not trying to win my 2024 Dynasty League December 27th, 2023. What I'm trying to do is make sure that the moves that I make today put my roster in position to capitalize on some of the value or the depressed value of, I'm telling you, Scott, I'm going to be buying so many of these old players come March, April, May, the Mike Evans, the Joe Mixons, the Zeke Elliott's, all these old guys, the Keenan Allens that are going to fall off the cliff. My goal now is to make sure that my roster is in the right shape, compliance, to assume some of those veteran values, to take some of those rookie bet hopium shots. Like, that's what I'm not trying to win next year today. And so many times that is why deconstructing and talking about what to shed is just as important in talking about what to add in order to build your roster up. It's also very important to talk about what you need to rid yourself of to have that roster in shape to acquire and assume some of the value later down the line. And we're going to do a lot more of these, Scott, to where we look at different leagues, and we're not going through the full process of the review because we're not really telling you exactly what to sell for or what to buy. But these are some moves that you should make to clear up some space on your roster That way you can take advantage of whatever value may be there later down the line. So that's about all I have to add to this, Scott. Anything else you got before we get out of here?
No, I love this exercise. I think I'm Mr. Roster Construction. And even I have rosters where I go, you know what? It needs some work. So I'm out there grinding. You're out there grinding, doing what we're saying we're telling everybody else to do. So I think that's the main takeaway. And this is fun. For me, Ray, this is the funnest part of the offseason, is you can kind of start looking back at what was the season and starting to prepare for the teams that you're going into next year with. You're starting to prepare what direction do I want to take those. So there's never an off season. There's always work to be done, and I really enjoyed this exercise. So I hope everybody got something out of this video. And, hit us up if you have any questions. Join the Discord. We're always in there.
And we are actually about to head to the Discord right now, so appreciate you guys checking out this premiere. We're heading over to the Destination Devy Discord. I've got an AMA tonight. Don't know who I'm with. I could be solo, but it doesn't matter. We're going to get in there. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to talk Week 17. We're going to talk fantasy. We're going to talk life. We're going to have a good time. So go to destinationdevy.com or patreon.com/allgas. Get in the Discord. And until next Wednesday, everybody, we're out of this thing. Be chill, y'all.